Welcome to the Jaren Jarvis channel. I am Jaren Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you 10 scary stories to fuck you up at night. 1. Natalie's Dad by Lilac Wine. This is a little more creepy/disturbing than scary, but it's something that still gives me chills when I think about it, and I try not to think about it very often. Note, all names have been changed. From about 5th to 9th grade, my best friend Natalie and I were pretty much inseparable. We lived only a few streets away from each other in an idyllic little town in the Midwest. The kind of place that feels like a living time capsule of the 1950s, charming houses with beautifully kept gardens. Huge old maple and oak trees lining every street. Neighbors who actually stop and greet each other as they walk their dogs or mow their lawns. Summer blocks parties, kids playing in the street until dinner time. That sort of thing. Natalie and I used to walk to and from school together every day, and I often stayed over at her house for an hour or two after school while my parents were still at work. I loved hanging out at her place because her mom was the sweetest person ever. She'd serve us delicious snacks, we'd tell her all about the latest middle school drama, and she'd even let us watch a TV show or play a computer game before we started our homework. Natalie's dad worked a lot and wasn't around often, but whenever I did interact with him, something about him seemed off. On a superficial level, he was perfectly nice and friendly, even funny. He had a great sense of humor and was always joking around with Natalie, me, and the rest of our friends on the few occasions that he was around. But even though I didn't sense a single bit of discomfort from any of my close friends, I couldn't help feeling uneasy in his presence. For one thing, he was a bit too touchy-feely. It was subtle, but I was always noticing it in little ways that made me slightly uncomfortable. Quick example, one weekend, he took me and Natalie and two of our friends to a cider mill. We picked apples, drank cider, and went on a hayride. When the ride was over, Natalie's dad was helping each of us off the side of the wagon, and I was last in line. Something about the way he grabbed my friends by the waist and let his hands linger just a touch too long once they were safely on the ground started to weird me out. When it was my turn, I quickly jumped off the wagon before he could touch me. He looked a little bewildered, but didn't say anything. Fast forward to Natalie's 12th birthday party. She had a sleepover with about 10 girls, and we arranged our sleeping bags on the floor of her living room since it was the biggest room in the house. The living room wasn't really closed off by any doors, it had a big opening that connected it seamlessly with the foyer/front hallway of the house. I was sleeping near that hallway, which I wasn't pleased about as I preferred to sleep surrounded by people whenever I went to sleepovers. I've always been super afraid of the dark and liked having that protection, as silly as it sounds. In the middle of the night, I'm awoken by a hand pressing on my arm. I didn't jolt awake or anything, but I opened my eyes and turned my head to survey my fellow partygoers. They were all dead asleep, some even lightly snoring. Suddenly I heard quiet giggling behind me. Still lying down and now officially frightened, I quickly turned my body to face the foyer. The opening in the wall that connected the living room and foyer was a big, sweeping arch. On the right side of the arch, I could just barely see the top of a man's head peeking out from behind the wall, only about 3 feet from the ground. Then I noticed his fingertips splayed out on the wooden floor. He was crouching. It was Natalie's dad. I froze. I honestly had no idea what to do. Was he just kidding around? Didn't it occur to him how creepy this was? Do I say something or just awkwardly ignore it and try to fall back asleep? Being my timid, non-confrontational preteen self, I decided to go the latter route. I turned back on my other side, scooted in as close as I could to my friend sleeping next to me, and somehow managed to fall back asleep, despite being obviously and understandably petrified. I'm not sure how long it was before I was woken up again, this time by a firm tapping on my temple. Knowing who it was this time around, I tried my best not to indicate that I was awake, struggling to keep my eyes closed and my breathing slow and deep. Again I heard that same stifled giggling. The sound was particularly disturbing because it was almost manic, like he thought this whole routine was absolutely hilarious and could barely contain himself. Even though it was coming from a grown man, it had all the giddiness of a 5-year-old playing hide-and-go-seek with his older siblings. Yet again, I had no idea what to do. I wasn't sure if he wanted me to acknowledge him, or what. I turned to face the foyer again, and just barely caught a glimpse of his head and fingers disappearing behind the wall in that same crouched position. More giggling. I quickly turned back and scooted even closer into my sleeping friend, partially waking her and causing her to shift around a bit. I hoped she would wake up completely, but she just turned over and quickly drifted back off. As I pulled my sleeping bag tighter over my shoulders, I heard what sounded like someone shuffling on all fours down the hallway. I don't remember how I got back to sleep that night, but somehow I did, and morning finally, mercifully arrived. Natalie's parents made us all pancakes, and her dad was acting completely normal. He didn't pay any particular attention to me, but didn't make a point to ignore me either. Just interacted with me like he did with everyone else, always smiley and jokey and friendly. A couple months later, Natalie had another sleepover. This time I made sure to secure a sleeping spot in the exact center of everyone, far from the front hallway. But later that night, I abruptly woke up in the middle of a deep sleep for seemingly no reason. I had been sleeping on my back, and just suddenly opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, wide awake. Almost instantly, I was overcome with the most intense feeling of dread that I have ever experienced. I felt like I couldn't move my limbs, like some invisible weighted blanket was holding my body down. Even though I knew I shouldn't, I slowly turned my head towards the front hallway. As my eyes adjusted in the darkness, I could see Natalie's mom and dad standing in the entryway, looking directly at me with the most angry, hateful expressions on their faces. They were positioned awkwardly far from each other, about 2 feet of space between them, with their arms stiff and straight at their sides. Even though they were a fair distance away from me, I'll never forget how disturbing their faces looked, contorted into pure rage that only seemed to grow in intensity the longer I allowed myself to look. Their eyes kept narrowing and they were showing all their teeth the way a threatened dog would, gritting them so tightly I thought their jaws would crack. After staring, frozen, for a good few seconds, I finally felt like I could move my arms and legs again. I quickly turned away from them and pulled my sleeping bag high up over my head, shaking. I barely slept the rest of the night, but I never heard any noise or movement from the hallway. The next morning it was all homemade pancakes and warm smiles and utter normalcy yet again. I never told Natalie about any of this, as I was pretty sure she would think I was either crazy or trying to prank her. Our friendship quickly faded a few years later anyway, which coincidentally was right around the time that her parents got divorced. Recently Natalie and her parents' divorce came up in conversation with my mom, who told me about a comment Natalie's mom made to her years ago. Back when Natalie and I were still super close, we had actually taken a few small road trip vacations together with our moms. I guess at some point on one of these trips, our moms were gossiping about a particularly wealthy and impossibly perfect family that lived in our neighborhood and had a reputation of being somewhat pretentious. Natalie's mom, skeptical about their apparent perfection, said, "Well, in this neighborhood you never know what goes on behind closed doors." The comment is innocent enough, but for me it adds an extra layer of creepiness given what I experienced with Natalie's parents. 2. Siblings and scissors by, yes, butthole jerky. About 7 years ago, my boyfriend and I moved into a duplex. After living there for about 6 months, we had become well acquainted with our neighbors. Everyone was cool except for this older lady and her creepy brother who claimed to be a medicine man. He also liked to stare into everyone's windows, especially at women. One night, at about 2 in the morning, the older lady comes pounding on our door. She said that her grandson had stolen her car and taken it to town and she needed to look for him. She didn't want to call the police on him. Unfortunately, times were tough and we only had enough gas to get to and from work, let alone drive aimlessly looking for her grandson and car. We told her we were sorry, and we were unable to help. She got mad at us and stormed off, muttering to herself, We went to bed and didn't think anything of it until a week later. We had went to town for a few groceries one day. When we came home, we discovered things were amiss. Knickknacks had been moved around, our wire plant shelf had been moved away from the wall and the back of it faced our front door. We initially thought someone had broken into our apartment but couldn't find anything missing. The door wasn't opened or unlocked when we got home, no windows were broken or had been opened. We thought someone was just fucking with us. Later in the evening, we went to cook dinner and discovered all our cooking knives were missing. Upon searching our apartment for the second time, we also discovered our pocket knives, scissors and box cutters were gone. Starting to feel officially creeped the fuck out at this point, I walked into my bedroom to see if there was anything else out of place. Then I noticed, my needle tool, used for making pottery, was stuck in the wall, all the way down to the handle. It was perfectly positioned at the head of our bed about 3 feet up between our pillows. I turned my room upside down, on a hunch I lifted up our mattress. Lo and behold, all our kitchen knives, pocket knives, scissors and box cutters were laying on top of the box spring. The pocket knives were opened, the box cutter blades were protruding, and the scissors in scissor position. It was some freaky demon shit. There was no way anyone had entered our house unless they had a key, which was also highly unlikely. We smudged, blessed our apartment and prayed over it because we could just feel negative energy, and spent a sleepless night being creeped out. The next morning, we went outside to smoke an anxiety cigarette. Lo and behold, our creepy pervert neighbor was on his porch, grinning at us the entire time we were out there. Imagine a psychotic Gomez Addams grin, if you will. I know it sounds crazy, but we were pretty sure it had something to do with denying his sister a ride. I'm not sure what they did, but it was supernatural and it scared the actual shit out of me. 3. Woman's Best Friend by Tara. My husband lost his job and we ended up moving to a mobile home his parents own in the California desert where he grew up. After living my entire life in the liberal enclaves of PNW/N Kali mountains and forests, an unexpected and unwanted move to a red zone where I knew literally no one besides my in-laws, who don't particularly like me, was highly stressful to say the least. Add to the situation that our 6-year-old was experiencing major culture shock and homesickness, I was about 4 months pregnant, and my husband was being a major taint crumb, just to give you an idea of the level of stress in the house. Oh, and did I mention we moved in the middle of July when temperatures were hovering around 120 degrees Fahrenheit and my father-in-law neglected to tell us that the AC in the house was broken and there was no flooring in half the place. Yeah. Waking nightmare. After about a month of the 3 of us living in my Phil's tiny study, the house is finally livable. It's located on the fringes of a tiny town that is about 45 minutes from the closest city. We have a truck stop, gas station, a fire station, a corner store and a smattering of houses. Our street dead ends at and is surrounded by BLM land and is tucked in between low hills / backs up to mountains. Half the other houses are uninhabited. My husband found work near his parents' house in the city, and since his parents were willing to help with childcare, our kiddo started school there as well. This left me at home alone with no car for long hours, which I secretly loved because it gave me time to unpack emotionally and physically, and also meant I had limited interaction with my in-laws, so I could enjoy being radiantly pregnant without jabs about how fat my face was getting. One day, about 3 weeks after we moved into the house, something felt off. I was sitting down in the living room, which has no windows to the front yard, and suddenly had the overwhelming feeling that I had to go let my dog in now, even though she'd only been outside for a few minutes. As I walked into the kitchen, I realized that it was eerily silent and still outside. Keep in mind, it was late August in the desert, so the windows and doors were all closed and the AC was on, so I'm not sure how I knew it was creepy outside before I opened the door to call in my dog, but somehow I did. Usually there's a breeze or bugs buzzing or hummingbirds hitting up the feeder on our deck, which had been the case when I let Doggo out. But when I opened up the sliding door to call for my dog, there was absolute silence. And when I looked out into the yard, I realized why. Sitting at our gate was a gigantic black dog. I don't just mean a big dog. The top of this dog's head was just below the top edge of our 8-foot chain link gate. It was easily as wide as a Mini Cooper, and looked like a cross between a Newfoundland and a grizzly bear. My dog is a Shar-Pei pit bull mix, and she only came to about mid-chest on this huge beast. She's sitting there, maybe 10 feet from it with just flimsy chain fence between them, watching it quietly. Tears immediately started pouring down my cheeks. I don't cry easily, and suddenly it felt like I was carrying 2 full-sized adults over my shoulders. It took every ounce of energy I had to walk to the edge of our small deck. I tried to very quietly whistle for my dog, and nothing really came out, or if it did, it was swallowed by the silence. Still, right as I whistled, both my dog and the black dog turned their heads to look at me. My dog slowly stood up and calmly walked over to me. You have to understand, she's the derpiest, bounciest collection of happy squish face love, and never does anything less than bound across the yard with her tail up, tongue out, and ears perked when she's called, so this was completely out of character. When she reached me, she turned and looked back at the black dog, then back at me, then started to walk back towards it like she wanted me to follow her. I made a lunge for her and grabbed her harness. The dog stood up, and we locked eyes. I was then hit by the deepest sadness I've ever felt. Worse than when either of my parents died, it was like a cold wave crashed directly in the center of my heart. I was sobbing uncontrollably as I dragged my dog inside. When I looked back, the black dog had begun to walk down the street towards the mountains. It went behind a large palo verde shrub, and disappeared. I sat on my kitchen floor sobbing and shivering for a good hour despite the searing summer temps. I finally calmed down and worked up the nerve to take my dog out again later that afternoon. When I checked the area around the gate for paw prints, there were none, but there was a giant void in the sandy tire tracks my husband made when he left for work. My dog remained subdued for a while, but was back to herself by the time husband and kid got home. I didn't say anything to him. Things weren't really great between us and he was in a bad mood, but he noted later on how funny it was that our dog kept pacing back and forth in front of the gate. About a week later I went in for a prenatal appointment. I'd lost my baby. The doctor said it was a failure to thrive / nothing I could have done / sometimes these things happen situation. I'd been feeling off for about 2 weeks, but had just chalked it up to how stressful life had been. I honestly would have marked the black dog off as a stress-induced hallucination or something had my dog not interacted with it so extensively. About a month later, I was hiking on the south end of Joshua Tree with my husband. We turned around to follow a hawk that had flown overhead, and there on the trail we'd just walked was a big black dog. Not as big as the one at the house. This one was closer to the size of a normal Newfoundland. It sat down and, as funny as it sounds, sneezed, then got up and walked off. My husband tried to follow it, but lost it. The area we were hiking was all low plants, nowhere for this dog to have come from or gone to without us seeing it for quite a while. Before it appeared, we'd been talking about our baby and had actually settled on the name for him, even though we'd never meet him. I guess you could see the black dog as something malicious or blame it for losing the pregnancy, but I don't. I think it came to escort the little soul I had onto its proper place in the universe, and it gives me great comfort to think of a little boy resting in the guard of a big, fluffy dog. My husband still thinks the one we saw while hiking was a stray, but whenever my dog meets someone new she sneezes as a sort of "I'm friendly" gesture. I think the dog was letting me know that the little guy made it to where he needed to be safely. 4. Mirror Mirror by Chaotic Eva. I'm so happy. So many. But to start, my son used to sleepwalk a lot when he was around 8 to 9 years old. I'd wake to find him in the hallway outside my bedroom just shifting from foot to foot, eyes open but unseeing. Creepy AF, let me assure you. One night I woke to a knocking sound, not hard, just sort of a rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It was my son's head as he tried to walk through the wall. So far not scary, just my kid being a little creepy through no fault of his own. Years later his little brother started doing the same damn thing, in the same freaking spot. Fast forward a couple of years later and we're doing a little Reno work. Took down the nasty wallpaper in the hallway and found that there was a mirror there, underneath the thick wallpaper. A fucking mirror. My boys had been trying to walk into a mirror. 5. Camera obscura by det_in_the_skirt. Tried posting this one a few years ago, but was too late. Not a ghost story, but it's one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. It happened during my freshman year of college, when I was back in my hometown for Thanksgiving break. I'm from a small town in New England, the kind of place you can't wait to get away from because nothing ever happens there. I guess maybe this was my town's way of getting back at me for thinking like that. It was late on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I was at a friend's house, happily reunited with my best friends from high school, since we were all home for the holiday. A fog settled in that night, owing to the classic New England mix of chill and humidity. As I drove home, I went by our town's library, which is situated next to a small duck pond. The fog was extra thick over the water and illuminated by the lamp posts surrounding the pond. It gave it an eerie, golden glow. Being the film student that I was, I had my camera with me, as always. Without thinking, I turned my car around, and pulled into the library parking lot, which overlooked the pond. I considered walking down to the pond for a moment, but something told me not to do that. It wasn't fear, not yet. I remember not feeling any fear at all, just excitement and awe of the sight in front of me. But still, I didn't get out of my car, and that decision probably saved my life. Instead, I kept my car running, headlights still on, and rolled down my window. I stuck my arm out the window and took a few photos of the pond and the fog. I pulled my arm back inside, and looked over the photos. They were pretty terrible, given how bad of a technique I was using. This was the first time something felt wrong. As I looked at the photos, I just felt. The best way I can think to explain it is that, sometimes, I have nightmares about being in open water. I know that there are sharks swimming beneath me. I can't see them, but I know they're there. I realized I was having that same feeling in my waking life, as I looked through these pictures. I felt the danger before I saw it. I looked up from my camera, fully alert, and peered in front of me, but saw nothing for a moment. Then, a figure materialized out of the darkness around the pond and into the beams of my headlights. It was a man. He was wearing dark jeans and a black zip-up fleece jacket. His hair was dark and short. I don't remember his face. He was walking in the direction of the library. In the direction of my car. I waited, not wanting to let my fear take over. Maybe he wasn't walking toward me. Maybe he was going to the road. But he kept coming toward me, walking faster and getting closer. I remembered my window was down and quickly rolled it up. Then, he was right in front of the hood of my car, and I could tell beyond a shadow of a doubt, he was staring straight at me. The look in his eyes, his face was expressionless, but his eyes were intent, determined. The moment we made eye contact, the moment I saw that look, I just reacted. I don't remember feeling fear or panic, just being more alert than I ever had been. I never took my eyes off of the man, as I threw my car into reverse and spun out of the parking spot I was in. But I went the wrong way. Instead of turning my car toward the exit, I turned toward the back parking lot. Yes, there was another exit I could get to, but I would have to drive around the entire library to get there. Either that, or reverse all the way out onto the road, and risk hitting something, a tree, another car. I didn't want to risk crashing, then I'd have no escape. I decided I would have to go around the library. It would take longer, but it was the safest option. All these thoughts went through my head in an instant. The man ran to get in front of my car. One of my biggest regrets in life is not running him over there and then. But I didn't. I put my car in drive and waited. He stopped running once he was in front of the car, then took his time. He walked slowly around the hood of my car, staring at me the whole time. Our eyes followed each other. He smiled. The moment he was clear of the front of my car, two things happened. He lunged for my car door. I floored it. I remember the sight of my car sailing past his outstretched hand. I drove as fast as I've ever driven, taking the corners at speed around the library. As I came out the other side, the exit was in sight, but the man wasn't. I drove as fast as I could toward the exit. As I got in front of the library again, I looked over, and saw the man running as fast as he could to get to my car. I sped out of the library parking lot and onto the main road. The police station was a block away, and I made a beeline for it, still driving recklessly fast, hoping to be pulled over by a cop. I got to the police station, and that's when the fear finally settled in. I sat in my car and cried, breathing raggedly, completely frozen. I couldn't get out of my car. I was terrified that the man had followed me there, that as soon as I got out, he would get me. A police officer came out to my car and escorted me inside. They must have seen me on their security cameras. I spoke with a female sergeant. I told her what happened. Gave her the best description I could. They immediately sent cars out, but found no one. I assumed that the man was after my car, my camera maybe, and said that aloud. The female sergeant looked at me and shook her head. What she told me, I'll never forget. I don't think he was after your car or your camera. He was after you. 6 Footprints in the Snow by Wild and Wonderful. This happened to me about 10 years ago while I was attending college at West Virginia University. At the time, I was really into backcountry camping, which for reasons that will become obvious, I am not into anymore. One of the benefits, actually probably the only benefit, of attending college in West Virginia was the easy access to many beautiful and remote wilderness areas. Just south of the college was this vast area of mountains and forest called the Monongahela National Forest. This region is so remote that the government had set up a huge telescope in the region due to how dark it is because of lack of human population. Anyway, this particular backcountry trip occurred during the Thanksgiving break-in classes. I had decided to stay in town and not head home for Thanksgiving that year, and a college buddy of mine, who I would often go on camping trips with, also ended up stranded in town. We had decided to use the break to go on a 3-day trip down to a region of West Virginia that we had always wanted to explore but had not had the opportunity to do so before due to it being a little further away than we would usually go. This region known as the Cranberry Wilderness had been talked about as being about as remote as one could get in any area east of the Mississippi. There were also lots of stories about campers, hikers, and fishermen going into the Cranberry Wilderness and never coming out with no trace of them ever being found. There was another story that I remember about a plane crash in that area with the plane being found, but no trace of the 3 passengers alive or dead ever turning up. I would be lying if I said that this little bit of local lore didn't make the idea of the trip even more exciting. At the same time, I thought a lot of these stories were apocryphal or could easily be explained. As the trip drew nearer, the weather forecast kept getting worse. It had been a very mild autumn up to that time, but the forecast looked like it was calling for ice and snow up in the mountains. Eventually, my buddy dropped out because of the forecast. Foolishly and stubbornly, I decided that I would go on my own. I had done a few solo trips before and at the time this didn't really bother me. My plan for the trip was to do about a 10-mile hike on the first day and then camp, do about another 10-mile hike on the second day and then camp, and hike about 5 miles back to my car on the third day. The first day of my trip was rather uneventful. In line with its reputation, I did not see another person. The only eerie thing that happened was at night I heard coyotes howling from the surrounding ridges, which is never a comforting sound when camping alone. On the second day of my hike, nothing went as planned. The trail that I was hiking on was much more rugged than I expected. At one point, I was supposed to turn on a connector trail to get to my second campsite, but this trail, which was on my map, was simply non-existent. This led me to having to take a much more circuitous route and adding about 5 miles onto the hike. Again, like the first day, I did not see another person. I reached my camp area for the second night, at the ominously named Hell for Certain branch, just as it was starting to get dark. The temperature had been dropping all day as well, and as soon as I was able to get my camp set up and my fire started, it had started to snow. When backcountry camping, I use a camping hammock, that had been modified for winter camping, because I find it much more comfortable, and lighter to carry, than a tent. You can't help feel, though, that when you're in the hammock, which unlike a regular hammock, surrounds you completely with material and a rain fly, that you are just hanging barefoot. Exhausted from my extended hike and wanting to get out of the snow, I climbed into my hammock, and as the last light of the day left, I drifted off to sleep. I slept like the dead until about 2 in the morning, when this loud noise jolted me awake. Confused and not know what had happened, I turned on my flashlight to look out of the small mesh opening in my hammock. I could tell by looking at the ground that it had snowed about an inch overnight, but I couldn't see more than 2 feet away from my hammock because a thick white fog had descended upon the forest. I was thinking that maybe I had just had a bad dream, when I heard this indescribable, unworldly howl. I couldn't place where it was coming from, as it seemed to be coming from all around me. At this point, I was scared shitless and lay in my sleeping bag in my hammock, paralyzed and not knowing what to do. I listened intently, but the woods around me were completely silent. After the howl I could not hear anything moving. I didn't hear that howl again. I lay there probably for about 3 hours, not knowing what to do and sure that I would get lost and never be found if I ran off into that thick fog. At around 5 a.m., I finally got up enough bravery to get out of the hammock. After lying there for the past 3 hours, I had finally rationalized that howl as some form of sleep paralysis. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, where you wake up, but are still dreaming, and cannot move and have weird auditory and visual perceptions. It seemed that the fog had started to dissipate a little bit. My first order of business was to take the piss that I had been holding for the past 3 hours. With my headlamp on, and my handheld flashlight and lightweight hatchet in hand, I crept away from the hammock into the nearby stand of trees. I shined my lights ahead and could now see out about 20 feet and saw nothing amiss. More confident now that my experience could indeed be chalked up to sleep paralysis, I relaxed and began to empty my bladder. I then noticed that my stream was landing into an indentation in the snow. Examining this indentation closer, I noticed that it looked like a footprint from a bare human foot. I quickly zipped up and started examining the snow all around my hammock much closer. All around I noticed hundreds of footprints and what looked like human handprints in the snow. Needless to say, I freaked out and without packing up the hammock started running the last 5 miles to my car. I haven't told many people this story, for fear that they will think that I'm crazy. At the same time, I've tried to rationalize the whole thing and say that maybe it was just sleep paralysis and that my clearly agitated mind hallucinated the foot and hand prints and that maybe they were just coyote prints, but I can tell you for sure that I have not been camping, whether alone or with a group, since that day and do not ever plan to go camping again. 7. Please Give Me It Oil It by Gin and Chronic. This story isn't supernatural, but it's 100% true and probably the closest I've, knowingly, come to being in serious trouble. After I graduated college, I decided that the only thing for me to do would be to go to Japan and teach English. I would be a foreign woman living alone, but Japan has a reputation for being super safe. And indeed the first year or so I lived there, all the normal precautions I was trained to take in the States just melted away. Little by little I started walking home at night alone, started taking shortcuts through dark, deserted streets, started wearing my headphones all the time and not paying attention to my surroundings because no one was really taking much notice of me anyway, except the occasional stare that comes from being a white woman in a suburb that had maybe 10 Westerners in it altogether. One warm summer night I decided that a walk to get some groceries would be nice. And not to my local grocery store, but the one that was 3 miles away via a backroads shortcut because exercise. As I was walking back, laden with groceries, relaxed, headphones in, podcast on, I was noticing the sort of greenish cast of the streetlights against a wall I was walking next to. The lights were at my back, so my shadow was projected in front of me. Now I don't know if this is something other people do, but in the States whenever I saw my shadow in front of me on the street at night I would always try to pay attention to whether there was another human-shaped shadow behind it, because that would mean someone was following me, maybe ready to attack. Right then I was doing it mostly idly, though, because this was a sleepy residential neighborhood, absolutely no one out and about, so I felt paradoxically kind of safe. And then I fucking saw it. Another shadow behind mine, coming up fast. Hey. 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 A young man sort of chirped at me in Japanese, practically skipping up beside me, eager, insistent, acting nothing like any other of the hundreds if not thousands of polite, reserved, even shy Japanese people I had interacted with up until then. Hey. He said in Japanese. Let's play. Play with me. I had never gotten so much as a cat call in Japan, let alone a request for company from a strange man who had found and followed me in the dark. Panic flooded me as I realized this guy was maybe a little off, a little unpredictable. I had no idea what he would do. Since it was late at night and the only available light was behind him, I could not see his face. I could only tell that his hair was white, or maybe very pale blonde, which is uncommon even in major cities in Japan. It had taken on a sort of washed-out greenish tint in the glow of the streetlights, and only added to the eeriness of his demeanor. By now I was shaking, walking as fast as I could. My mind had gone blank. I couldn't remember any of my Japanese, I couldn't remember even what I was supposed to do, physically, to ward off any kind of attack. I didn't think I could overpower him. I almost certainly couldn't outrun him. But then, like some sort of B-movie, a Japanese lesson I had literally had just days ago about how to tell someone to leave you alone flashed through my mind. Please go away, I said in Japanese, as firmly as I could with my voice quivering as much as it was. He said something I didn't catch. I repeated please go away like some sort of reverse Bloody Mary. He stopped. I walked on a bit then looked over my shoulder. He was still standing there, watching me. I kept going. I looked back again a few moments later just as I turned a corner. And he was gone. When I got back home, two things occurred to me that I had not noticed or remembered in my panic. The first was a fairly recent murder of a UK-born English teacher in Chiba Prefecture, just a 2-hour train ride from where I lived. She had been murdered by her student and her body disposed of in concrete in a bathtub on his balcony. As of that night, the murderer was still at large and it was believed he had somehow changed his appearance to elude authorities. The second thing that occurred to me was that I had misremembered the Japanese lesson. I had switched around two sounds in the keyword go away. What I was actually firmly telling my pursuer was please give me a toilet. Anyway, it worked. I never saw him again. 8. Making the bed by gender-neutral username. I wrote about a different creepy thing last year that happened in this same house, but I can't find that post anymore, thanks, Kinya. Anyway, here's another one that happened about a year before that other one. I got a promotion at work and moved my family from Texas back to my home state. My wife's aunt and uncle lived next door to a house they wanted us to rent because it had been empty for more than 3 years, but they knew the owner. We worked out a lease agreement and moved in. Nice little house in a nice enough middle-class neighborhood, and living next to relatives was great because they offered to watch our kids regularly. At the time we had twin not quite 1-year-olds. They slept in separate cribs in a room down the hallway from our bedroom and they were really good at sleeping through the night. A couple of months after we moved in we started hearing sounds like footsteps down the hall. The hallway was carpeted, but it sounded like floorboards creaking underfoot. The house wasn't very old, maybe 25 years. I chalked it up to the house settling, but it happened almost every night for 2 weeks. Then one night one of our boys woke up screaming in the middle of the night. My wife and I ran into their room and my wife screamed. Both of our boys had somehow been neatly tucked under their fitted crib sheets, like someone had made the bed over the top of them. My wife ripped off the sheet, picked up the crying baby, and started comforting him. I walked over to the other crib and saw that the other baby was lying completely still under the sheet. I ripped the sheet off him and picked him up. He woke up from a dead sleep and looked at me bleary-eyed. As I was holding him and staring at his face trying to figure out if he was okay, suddenly he smiled. But not at me. He was looking over my shoulder at the ceiling. My wife and I took the babies to bed with us that night. Nothing like that ever happened again. 9. Hester by Suburban_Doldrums. Right before I turned 21 I moved to a new city, transferred colleges, and got an apartment by myself. I picked a place out on the third story of a rambling old Victorian mansion, a modest studio with white metal cabinets from the 1950s and a rusted fire escape which always gave me bad feelings. It was metal, and rather than a window access to it had a glass, full-sized door. I was young and living in a not-so-great part of town and my imagination always got the best of me, especially late at night when I couldn't sleep. I couldn't shake the idea of someone climbing up the fire escape and opening the door. Beyond the threat of a real-life criminal, I also knew there was a ghost in the house, especially in my apartment. Not an unfriendly spirit, but still, something there, a presence that knew I was living in its space. The same typical ghost-type creepy tropes all happened at random times when I lived there, those cabinets wide open when I woke up in the morning, my keys or other items getting misplaced or sometimes being replaced. I remember one time frantically searching for my car keys for like 15 minutes, rushing from the kitchen to the bathroom to my dresser, when all of a sudden I noticed them sitting smack in the center of my dining room table, a place that I had already looked over a few times. During these moments I usually said, aloud, "Come on Hester." I don't know why, but I named the ghost Hester, probably because I was an English major. Hester became a joke to me and my friends, my family too. "Damn it Hester," I'd say when I'd come home from a long day from school and work to the radio just blaring at top volume, knowing it was off when I'd left that morning. "Hester," I'd mutter whenever my bedside lamp flickered when I'd be reading right before sleep. My girlfriends and I would stumble into the apartment drunk and before falling asleep wish Hester sweet dreams too. It was all pretty silly and quaint. Even though Hester was sort of annoying, I got the feeling the presence was amused by my young single girl ways and never meant to harm me or really frighten me. Hester just liked fucking with me. Anyway, one night, after I'd been living there for about 2 years, I woke up to the feeling of someone flopping down on the bed next to me. A very deliberate shake, meant to rattle me awake. I shot up, confused, scared, and then two things happened at the same time. My living room light blazed on, and one of those metal kitchen cabinets slammed open and shut 3 times in succession, bang bang bang. I could barely muster the thought, "What the fuck, Hester?" when I heard another sound, that to this day terrifies the shit out me. Someone outside the glass fire escape door, their feet stomping as they went down the rusted metal steps, but thankfully, going away from the apartment. So yeah, after that, I never minded Hester. Because that annoying presence that liked to fuck with me whenever I was late, who liked to show itself to remind me it was around just as soon as I sorta forgot about it. Well, I'm quite sure it protected me that night. Thanks, Hester. 10. A Little Hole in the Wall by 4000 Otham. Okay, here goes. Writing this out makes me want to barf. I was a news reporter right out of college, reporting on dismal topics in dismal towns. After 3 or 4 years of this, with the help of a friend, I landed an interview at an ad agency in Cincinnati. I got a job writing speeches and press releases and doing the usual early PR career grunt work. After stints in Alaska and West Virginia, Cincy seemed like a metropolis, and I picked a totally refinished first-floor apartment off of Craigslist. It was $400 a month and not in a great part of town, though the landlord assured me it was changing. Besides, in West Virginia, I was living in an old furniture factory for $300 a month and kicking crackheads off the front stoop. This place sounded like paradise. My huge black dog Dozer and I drive down the street for the first time. A library, a record store, restaurants. I pull up to my building, a few blocks down from the retail stuff, and it's not at all as described. The vestibule for the apartment is caked with grime. But I already have my key and I open the door to find an almost eerily perfect apartment. Everything is brand new. The main room is in front. White carpet, white walls, a refinished bathroom, a boring but tidy kitchen. Huge windows, high ceilings. In the back is a small bedroom with a door leading out to a tiny, 3-step back stoop and a little fenced backyard. Over the next couple of weeks my friend helps me meet people, including her friend Alan. He's great, we kind of friend hang out and kind of boyfriend-girlfriend hang out. Who knows? I have to drive around the state a lot for work and he watches Dozer while I'm gone. I always go to his place to pick her up on my way home. The first time I do this, I come into the back of the apartment with my bags and race to the bathroom to pee. The seat is up, and I fall right into the toilet. I figure Alan left it up, and unpack, go running with Dozer, etc. A couple of weeks later, I have to travel again. I leave my keys with Alan so he can pick up Dozer after he gets off work. Same routine, I pick her up 2 days later and go straight home, in through the back bedroom door. I go to the bathroom and sit down again, I fall right into the toilet. I think, I need to ask Alan not to do this when he picks up Dozer, it's so weird. I walk out of the other bathroom door and into the main room. Everything there is covered with a thick layer of dust, as if I'd been gone for years. It covers my dining room table, the stray coffee cup I'd left there. It's sunk into my mom's old velvet couch, on my picture frames, onto every nook and cranny of the huge yellow hutch against the wall. It's on the windowsills, on every handle of every drawer. Only the inside handle of the front door is perfectly clean. The door is locked. I realize the white carpet is filled with even more dust. It's white on white, so I hadn't noticed. I get out the vacuum and I fill 2 bags. I call the Seattle-based landlord and say that if he's renovating other parts of the building they need to chill on the construction dust. He says he's short on funds at the moment and my renovation was and will be the only one. After that I'm home for a couple of weeks and everything's fine. I figure the air ducts burped out some old gross stuff. For my next trip, the usual. I come home with Dozer and the seats up. I had teased Alan about it and he'd said, I've never used the bathroom in your apartment. I go out into the main room and the box of pictures from college I'd dragged around for a couple years was on a dining room chair. Every spring break picture of a girl in a bathing suit, some slutty sorority-themed outfit, a towel, anything sexy. They are all arranged neatly in a grid on the dining room table. I can feel my blood rushing in my ears. I walk through every room, look under the bed, open the front hall closet with a pair of kitchen shears in my hand. Nothing. I call Alan, politely, remembering that I don't know him all that well, not really, and ask him about the pictures. He'd seen nothing like this, he says, and doing such a thing would be hella creepy. I'm so afraid that I can hardly hear him. I call the landlord to see who else has keys but he's not picking up. I call over and over. I don't want to leave Dozer there, I've just been super weird to Alan, and I don't want to sound insane. I'm just standing in the apartment. I end up taking a picture of the picture grid with my digital camera to prove to myself that it happened, cleaning it up, making a sad dinner, and spending the whole night talking to everyone I can think of on my flip phone, 2005 years old, until I fall asleep. The doors are locked, Dozer's on the end of the bed, and every light is on. I'm in the office or at home with Dozer all week. Every time I walk in my apartment I'm terrified, but it's just her waiting, wagging her tail. I get cool about Alan again after all, my friends know him, he's really fun, he just doesn't seem like the type. Still, the next time I travel, I drop Dozer off at his house and I don't leave him a key. He insists on coming with me when I go back to the apartment. Sitting neatly in the middle of the back stoop is a small black rectangle. I bend down and pick it up. It's the remote control for my fancy digital camera I used as a reporter. Under it is a sheet of paper. It's a printout of picture I took of the grid of swimsuit pictures left on my dining room table. Alan goes in the house for me. Everything is locked tight, and my camera, the most valuable item I own, is gone. The living room is covered with deep, pillowy dust, the front doorknob is pristine. I don't clean anything, I leave and go to Alan's place, where I drink as much as possible. I call the landlord again, he says he has a key in Seattle, and I have a key in Cincinnati, and that's all he knows of. I call the non-emergency police, but the police are swamped in 2005 Cincinnati. They tell me a neighbor probably has a copy of my key, that all the Northside landlords are grifters, to get my own deadbolt and keep valuables locked in the trunk of my car. They will take a report if I'm willing to drive to the station. I buy deadbolts for the front and back doors. I spend as little time in the apartment as possible. I try to break the lease but the landlord won't let me out and I can't afford to do anything else. I spend a lot of time with Alan. On the next trip, I come back to find my toilet seat up and a bunch of my food gone. On the trip after that, it's just a day and a half, so I ask Alan to drop in and check on Doza, do her walks, keep her company. Nothing happens. Trip after that, Alan takes Doza. Everything's normal. I check the mail, still nothing but junk circulars, same as the past 2 months. Nothing I order arrives, so I start having things delivered to my office. But this time when I open the front hall closet to put my coat away, there's the entire past 2 months of mail. Online orders, packages from my mom and faraway friends, all my bills. They are crushed, opened, ransacked, soaking wet and streaked with dirt. I just run out into the street, on this sunny day, and everything's normal but I can't hear, I'm too scared. And slowly I realize the street is busy and my huge dog is out here and I get myself together enough to hold her collar and sit on the curb. I turn around to face the building. Her face at the very top window, in the attic, sinks below view. Other stuff disappears over time, a collection of coins my dad has given me from the places he's visited, more food, any drop of alcohol I buy. But nothing ever happens to me. No one breaks in when I'm home. There are no menacing figures at the window, no creepy feelings at night, and the face in the attic starts to feel like a dream. I even go up there, it's just a bunch of people's extra stuff in storage. This was some asshole with a key, I decide, and I'm making a good chunk of this up. The longer things are normal, the more it fades. I barely sleep, it makes everything feel even dreamier. And then, one night, I'm getting dressed cute to go out. I use the blackness of the long windows to check my reflection. I put on my shoes and one turns white. It's dust again. It's not all over like before, it's concentrated around my huge hutch. I get out the vacuum and get to work, teetering in heels, but it's piled around the side of the hutch, which is hard to move. I turn off the vacuum, brace my legs against the couch, and push the hutch out toward the center of the room. In the wall is a hole the size of a man. The dust, of course, had been from the sawing. My company put me up in a hotel after that, until I could move. My landlord let me break the lease. Later, during the process of getting a felony conviction, I learned that 2 men did all that stuff specifically to scare me, that they sat peeping through the gap at the back of the hutch for months. One lived in the apartment next door. The wall opened into a little pocket between the apartment stairwell and the basement. They hid it with plywood. My neighbor described it all for me in court, smiling at me. They watched me check myself out in the full-length mirror, cook meals, watch sad movies, flirt with guys on the phone, do sit-ups, talk to Doza, have the occasional cry, go to the bathroom, everything. They kept a hoard of snacks from my kitchen in the wall to enjoy while they passed the time. My long kitchen knife was found in the wall, plus a boning knife I didn't recognize, but they didn't want to come in while Doza was home, and I was never without her. Every morning on the way to work for 6 months, I'd driven past a wanted billboard featuring one of their faces. I have never lived alone again.